Greetings, Gumshoes, and welcome back to another episode of Silver Screen Sleuths. I am your host, Emily Edwards, mystery author, podcaster, and hopefully friend to all. But I know I am a friend to my guest, Keith Roysdon. How the hell are you doing?
I'm doing okay, other than wondering if my Wi-Fi is going to flake out on me. I'm just absolutely fine.
It's fine. I have had multiple guests with Wi-Fi flake out, and if anybody could tell, they've at least been polite enough not to say anything nasty in comments. So we are
You didn't
golden.
see my comments. Okay.
Through the magic of the internet, Keith and I talk like every single day, all day, every day. And like, even though this is the second time I'm only like really hearing your voice because you're doing the show for a second time, I'm like, this is my buddy. We're just gonna like rap out about stuff for an hour.
I should have adopted some strange accent or something.
Just you show up with a monocle, twirling a mustache.
Absolutely.
It was so funny. The last time we did a show, you were my guest. You were the first guest I ever recorded with, but I saved you to the third episode because we were talking about ZODIAC, the absolutely phenomenal David Fincher movie that really focuses a lot on journalism and investigative journalism. And we're kind of doing another investigative journalism movie today, which is Alfred Hitchcock's 1954 classic Rear Window. And I thrust this one on you. I was like, we're doing this just so you know. And you were kind enough to agree. So I appreciate that immensely.
I was just so happy to. And this weirdly has a little bit of a tie-in also, because I saw this movie along with several other Hitchcocks in a theater, a historic theater, one built, I think, opened in 1929 in downtown Muncie, Indiana. And in the 1980s, after some copyright or something, some kind of agreement was reached, Universal released a bunch of Hitchcock films to theaters. So, I mean, it's followed by several years when Gone with the Wind is re-released to theaters. So in the 80s, Rear Window and Vertigo and a few others were released by Universal. And I was during a period I was reviewing movies. So I was reviewing 30 to 40-year-old movies just like they were brand new. I didn't try to make anybody think they're brand new or people that does this guy think we can't see this on TV? Or we haven't seen, because it wasn't really at the dawn of video cassettes, but it was pretty early on. Not everybody had video. So it was at the time, I mean, aside from the fact the movies were a treat, it was at the time a treat to go to, especially an historic theater, and see these re-releases. So it's a very special thing for me, and it does strangely have a journalism tie-in for me.
Yeah, I mean, those old theaters must be so gorgeous. We had one in the town where I grew up, and I don't think it showed a lot of movies. I went to a lot of concerts and like shows there when I was a kid, and I didn't really get to experience like old theaters until I went to college, and there were just so many in Boston. My college owned a couple of them, and they did a lot of live theater there. But there's really nothing better than sitting in an opulent old movie house watching a movie that was made, pre-1970s. These sort of just like the Technicolor colors, the makeup that you can see, the sweatiness, the costumes, the lighting. This movie must be incredible on a big screen, and I've never seen it.
It's really beautiful. I mean, partly it's so gorgeous because the courtyard set with the back of the building visible to the Jimmy Stewart character, and of course how vivid the colors are outside the apartment and inside, courtesy of the gowns that, my goodness, what's
Grace
her name?
Kelly.
Grace Kelly wore. I just had.
Oh, I know. I always have IMDb and like Wikipedia pulled up, so I don't space out too badly. But sometimes the other day when I was recording with Ellen Byron, I was like, I need to look this up, and I got the year the movie came out wrong. I was just like, whatever, we're winging it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that happens once in a while to me too.
But this movie, like, just to touch on the costuming for a second, like this movie was the way that Dior's post-war use of fabric was really introduced to the Americas. And so if you know anything about fashion, you know this to be true. Edith Head basically took a 1950s look from Christian Dior that was in all the magazines and put it on Grace Kelly. And there's never been a more perfect person to put the new look on because she was just so elegant. So when she walks in that huge white skirt and the black jacket, that was a near stitch for stitch recreation of a Christian Dior look called the New Look. And it was supposed to be a celebration that wartime rationing was over. You can use 30, 50 yards of fabric of tulle in order to make this humongous skirt, and it was supposed to be a really artful, but also gleeful joy of consumerism. And so you're like, I didn't know that.
That makes total sense, because when I wrote a book set in 1948, one of the things that I wanted to show there was that, well, it's in a short story also, that people were so ready to have a good time. Now, the stark reminder that remains of soldiers were still, this long after World War II, were still coming to the United States. So there's this really gut punch of people who are finding their sons finally delivered back to the United States.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there was so much of a feeling of we need to, like you said, we need to be joyful. We need to celebrate. It's like we're kind of coming out of that fallout shelter. Well, actually, they were just going into the fallout shelter.
Yeah,
but
different era.
But because of the Cold War. But that whole idea that we need to kind of break loose and shake off what had been a decade or decade and a half by the time of this movie of this pallor that hung over all of us. Not to say there's anything equivalent to that now.
No.
But just the idea that people wanted to see those beautiful colors. You Instagram today about your Viviana Valentine book and the fact that all the dresses in that are real dresses, real outfits.
Yeah.
And that the very fashionable cast of characters in that mystery war. And I just think that's wonderful that there is this celebratory element to a lot of these movies, sometimes no matter, and stories and novels, sometimes no matter what else was going on, there was something to celebrate, something to mark. And certainly this movie is like that.
It's odd because we don't think of Hitchcock as this particularly louche, sort of like debaucherous filmmaker. We often think of him as someone who doesn't like women, who may not really like fun. But when you think about a lot of his films, and oddly, this one and Vertigo and North by Northwest are really movies that are so saturated in color. Marnie is not really a yucca minute kind of movie at all, but his use of red and his use of color in so many of his movies is really very
Vertigo,
purposeful.
Vertigo was almost pre-psychedelic.
Yeah.
In some ways.
Very much so. I don't like Vertigo personally. Like, I know that's going to put me on the outs with so many film people, but I don't like the movie.
It's really my least favorite of a lot of his career.
Yes. I love this movie in particular, even though it's a very similar almost character for Jimmy Stewart in that, we know him either as, I grew up with him as Elwood P. Dowd in Harvey, where he's this very gentle, mild-mannered, polite, deferential man. We know him from It's a Wonderful Life, where, he's put upon, but then he discovers like this great love of his family and his wife and his children and his community. And then you have this movie and comparatively Vertigo, but we're not going to talk about that one because we don't like it, where he's just a straight up rat bastard. Like, he's just a mean, cantankerous old man.
And I just want to be, and by the way, that's something to talk about too, the age difference between two lead actors. But yeah, I just wanted to go like, dude, can you see this woman that's standing there? How can you possibly, and how can you realistically be written as somebody who's grumpy about Grace Kelly doing that kind of like angel coming down, lean into him in one of the earliest scenes? It's like, what are you complaining about?
Complaining about, like, every time I watch it, my husband like looks at me and he's just like, oh, I have to be nice to the most gorgeous woman on the planet who wants to sleep with me and nothing else from me whatsoever. Right. She brings me champagne. Oh, no.
I know. A whole dinner from 21, right? Was it from 21?
With the busboy bringing it in.
And I hope the busboy got a really good tip.
I'm sure he did.
For like, however, getting in the cab at 21 and bringing over this dinner, which was like, was it lobster
It's lobster
something?
and champagne.
Oh, yeah, sure. Like I said, oh yeah, and she noted she included cab fare when she gave him the money. So boy, I hope he got a nice tip.
Oh my God. And I think, it's really hard to like Jimmy Stewart's character in this. And I don't expect every character to be likable. I don't expect me, to be like, oh, everybody's a good person. But admittedly, Hitch did not set him up for success when he's just so bitter about Grace Kelly coming into his life and treating him to sumptuous things that all he has to do is say thank you. Like
I would not second guess James Stewart's performance or his take on a character or something like that. And it's been a long time since I've read a lot about the movie, so I don't know how much of that was in the script.
I'm sure most
or
of
how
it.
much of that was Hitchcock's direction
Yeah.
or whatever. But the idea that he is so grumpy and he's so caustic, and there were times I was just like, she should just slap him and leave. And
Exactly.
she does kind of exit a couple of times. So I think certainly, a dramatic door slamming exit would have been appropriate. So maybe that would have gotten to rom-com or sitcom or rom-com sitcom or both. But my God, yeah.
I love the fact that this movie does set him up with a bridge, though, in what I think possibly the greatest character actress of all time, of Thelma Ritter, she steals every scene she's ever in every movie ever. Like, I love her so much.
And she has all the best lines in this movie. And they're usually, this reminded me a little bit of the movie, the Hitchcock movie, Shadow of a Doubt, with, you have not?
I love it. It's one of my favorite Hitchcock movies ever made.
I thought you had seen it. You hadn't seen it. Yeah, I love it. It's so wonderful. But there's a little bit to her pronouncements and the way she says things that highlights the gruesomeness of everything, and Grace Kelly's characters. Lisa is kind of blanching a couple of times to some of the things that are said. But it reminded me a little bit of the true crime fans, the dad and the next door neighbor played by Hugh Cronin in Shadow of a Doubt, who are like this absorbed discussion of the best way to kill someone, and also made me think a little bit of boy writers talk, the idea that, people talk about, oh my God, I hope nobody ever sees my search engine's history because of all the things, what's the best way, if Lars Thorwald had Google, the best way to dismember your wife and take her out in cases or something like that, that would have been a dead giveaway, so to speak.
Exactly.
But Thelma Ritter, just a wonderful actress and has all the lines. I made notes of a couple of them. But the other thing, do you mind? I'll say this.
Go for it.
She defines the story. Thelma Ritter's character defines, because she says, we become a nation of peeping Toms. And that's been never more true than it is today, in the sense
glad you brought this
of
up.
all the things that you can see on TikTok and Instagram, and the outpouring of things that you really probably should never want to see on Instagram. Just like horrifying things. And Thelma Ritter's character, tell me the character's name, I forget.
I don't remember off the top of my head. Oh no.
I came well prepared for this, as you can tell, because I can't remember Grace Kelly's name and I can't remember Thelma Ritter's character's name. But
is it Selma?
It really reflects the kind of the dual mojo of this movie, in that it's pretty obviously always about voyeurism and, watching people and things like that. But the idea of that, logical extension to that, is the idea of seeing and how we see people. And I mean, really, that set with a courtyard and the view into all those apartments just could not have demonstrated the idea of seeing and how we take information in, how we take pictures in. Could not. I mean, it was just brilliant.
It's an absolutely stunning piece of set work. And I think one of the most interesting aspects of it is the fact that Jeff, or Jimmy Stewart's character, never assumes that someone is watching him. He always assumes that he is the only active watcher. And I think that's so interesting. It's something that I was thinking about and ruminating over while, thinking about this movie in advance of our conversation, because it's so, she says we're becoming a nation of peeping Toms. And it's so funny because there is a belief amongst, the great political divide of America that rurality is safe and that urbanism is inherently dangerous, because if you're around people, and this goes back to the Puritans, like truthfully, like when the Puritans first moved to Massachusetts, and I'm going to yammer for a second, there was a true belief amongst the settlers of Massachusetts, and specifically the English Puritans, that the sin of the city was something that they had to escape, but also that nature was inherently devilish and ruled by Satan. And so it's really embedded in American society that the only safe place to live is essentially suburbia, that liminal space in between urbanity and rurality. And go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm just going to say, and of course, we see that reflected in politics now, in that the suburban life, those voters are highly desired, but for at least one party, the population concentration areas are vital to them and who they are most likely to appeal to. And then you have the other party that, I love when people show those maps and look how much red is here and how much blue is here. And people are like, well, land doesn't vote.
Exactly.
So, that's one thing. But there's this kind of these noble people of such and such land or something like that. We want to appeal to them. And oh my God, we could talk about politics on a podcast just as much as we could talk about movies. But yeah, that you're absolutely right. That idea that one is better than the other. And we can see that reflection in how movies treat city life and how they treat rural life.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, probably beginning by the time this movie came out, how they treat suburban life, because suburban life kind of, what was it, Levittown, New York, the first,
the planned communities,
tract housing, neighborhoods, cul-de-sacs, all that kind of stuff. So we were seeing at about this time a lot of the formation of those good, bad, and horrible kind of labels that, and you take it both ways. Some parties would say the horrible are the people who have gun racks in their pickups, and the other parties like, oh, the horrible are the ones who like take a bus to work.
Exactly.
So,
who have to pass their neighbors in a hallway. Oh, no.
Yeah.
No, it's funny because this movie came out in 1954, so around the time that my parents were born. And my parents were born in New York City. They lived in apartments. My dad, I think, was in Brooklyn and my mom was in Queens. So very similar to this, not in Manhattan. And then they both, this is the peak time of white flight, of how Robert Moses was specifically engineering New York City to urge and essentially force well enough white people out of the city into the suburbs. My parents' families then moved to Long Island. That's where I was born. And so like the engineering of Robert Moses and his evil little minions to make New York City as inhospitable as possible, and to really make it almost like an escape from New York style, like islands separated from the good, and I'm air quoting this just in case you're not watching this on YouTube, the good suburbs where like well-off or upwardly mobile GIs returning from returning from World War II with which the GI Bill was not for everybody. It was just the white people who went to war essentially got their payouts, and Black people and Hispanic people and Asian people who fought in the war did not get their GI payouts. And all of this was done very, very purposeful. And I really love the fact that this movie really captures what we imagine New York City to be in the 1950s. It's hot. It's close. There's people speaking tons of different languages. It's people from all different sorts of backgrounds. Almost everyone is kind of on the poor side. how dare you have probably college educated Lisa working in magazines? Like, even though she's really glamorous and she's Grace Kelly, there's still an aspect of seediness to her because she's not getting married. She's not having kids. She's working a job, and she's working a job that only deals with women's pleasure, with like buying things and spending money and things that are very corporeal and sinful and are still seen as very corporeal and sinful. And this movie just sits in it, and it just loves it because Jeffries is sitting in it, and he's surrounded by all of these people, and I can't tell if he likes it or not.
Well, I had to mention this at some point. This movie is full of favorite moments for me, but one of my favorite moments, he's like grouchy and grumpy and just like an obnoxious jerk through so much of the movie when it's directed toward her. But when she really embraces the murder conspiracy idea and starts talking about it very excitedly, Hitchcock does a shot of Jimmy Stewart's face, and he's got this look in his eyes, and he's beginning to smile and everything. It's like, man, there's no point, and we're talking about Grace Kelly, keep in mind, there's no point he's more happy to be dating this woman than when she's embracing the idea of this guy cutting his wife up.
Yes,
exactly. So what a strange thing but perfect. Oh my God, so perfect. Yeah. But the shot of Stewart just like beaming with delight when she's like excitedly telling this.
He had a handsaw and a suitcase. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
One of the things that we talk about a lot with Hitchcock is with the joke amongst especially people who write mysteries is that like he doesn't like women at all. And I'm wondering, in this movie is really interesting because Jeff is so frustrated, and I'm going to spitball at you for a second. He's so frustrated because he's in a really feminized position. And so I often talk about how Rear Window is actually a cozy mystery. Because when you think of Miss Marple and she's in St. Mary Mead, what she is she's a little old lady that sees everything in the tiny community that surrounds her. And that is the essence of a cozy mystery.
Absolutely, yes.
And that's so evident on screen here. And here you have relative prime of his life, because prime of his life lasted a lot longer for male movie stars in the 1950s, Jimmy Stewart, in a really feminized position. And he is furious about it.
That's really good. That's very good analysis. I like that. I hadn't thought about that. I get so hung up on I'm this gruff guy who can go anywhere, and I may have to sleep in the same clothes for 2 weeks and all this stuff. And you're right. He's probably objecting to how weak he is. Not to say feminized, but of the mode of the day, yes, somebody would call that feminized, being weaker, not being able to get up and take pictures of a race, where tires are flying toward him and stuff like that. But yeah, that's great analysis. I really like it.
And I really wonder if we say that Hitchcock hated women because he didn't have the framework to be like gender critical in 1954. Not only was he born in like the 1800s and living in the time and living in, and he's British, and that certainly adds a different complexity that a lot of American culture necessarily didn't have. But I don't know if Hitchcock had the framework to be as critical about gender presentation I know he didn't have the same, framework to be as critical about gender presentation as we do now. And this movie really brings it front and center for me because Jeff is so mad about being, unable. He's broken. Hate to use the word impotent, but like he's
about just being disabled.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it is another story of disability, which again, a lot of people coming back from the war are experiencing still in the 1950s. You might have someone who is sent to war at 18 in the 40s, and he comes back, and by 1954 he's a 25-year-old man who might be missing a leg or missing an arm or being unable to see. And this movie does so much with disability and that frustration in a really empowering sense. But it requires him to do something that, again, is very feminized, which is snooping. It's considered the little old lady sin. Like, you invite your mother-in-law over and she starts rifling through your medicine cabinets. And that's kind of what he has to do in order to, because he's stationary and because he's stuck. It's so, ooh.
And the snooping was so central to that character. And I mean, the seeing is so central to that character that even after they completely believed that a murder had taken place, that Jeff, the character, is still watching people in the windows and smiling. I mean, here's the setup that let them see what was probably a murder scene. And he's still smiling when the newlywed guy has gone to the window to get a break from the voracious, wife. And she calls him back, says, Steve or whatever, come back. I don't even know if she says come back, but she calls his name. So he pulls the shade back down and you can imagine what she's calling him for. But the Jeff character smiles after that. They're already well onto the trail of this killer. And there's at least one other incident when he's still plainly just enjoying this big context that has allowed them to see this horrific thing. And by the end, by the time, the dog and everything like that, nobody's enjoying it. Nobody is smiling by that point. But I always thought that was fascinating. That couple of times that probably says something about me, or probably says something about the way that character is written or the way Hitchcock directed him. But the times when he seems to be enjoying himself is when she's into the conspiracy, and when it's like basking in the conspiracy enough that he's enjoying all the input, all the other intrigues and things like that. So
it's really fascinating because, both he and Lisa have media jobs. And so but he considers his serious because he has to go off and shoot for Life magazine or Time magazine or whatever. I'm sure it was Life at the time. And she just has the frivolous job of talking about shopping. And it's really interesting when you think about how women's magazines were used up until probably the early 2000s, when social media kind of took over publishing and it was user generated or bottom up instead of top down. And we touched this a little bit earlier where it's like he thinks she's so helpless and so shallow and so uneducated to the way of the world. And she has employed him, the reason why he's had checks. And I think there's a real misunderstanding of the power that she has and the things that she's capable of. And I think that's really the most sexist thing at play, is like he really does not understand that she is a very capable woman in her own cutthroat world who is capable of scaling a fire escape in 4-inch stilettos, in order to like tackle a freaking murderer.
And they probably did this intentionally, but in the opening scene, when they pan over his various, his war photos that he took that are framed on the wall and everything, and correct me if I'm wrong, the camera pans down to the pile of magazines, which are probably supposed to be Life or Look. Mm-hmm. And then you see his work on the cover of one of those, and it's a fashion shoot or something like that. I mean, It's not from some war-torn country. It is a glamour type shoot that he did that made the cover. And I'm sure he was on the cover of more than one. I'm talking about the character, the L.B. Jeffries character. But at the same time, it's like, as much as he poo-poos everything she does, I mean, he's on the cover of a national magazine for the I can't even remember what the caption said, but it's a stark image of a woman's face, of like a model or something like that, I think. Maybe. But,
yeah, it's supposed to be her. It's supposed to be a photo of her. And I think that's how we assume that they've met, where it's just like,
I missed that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
And so
but it was very much a glamour kind of thing. So he can be as macho as he wants about what's up on the wall, including, the tire flying at him that disabled him. But I mean, really, he's known in that world as well as in the world of gritty war photography
exactly.
or something like that.
Because you and I joke a lot about grit and how it's such a mechanism, it's such a facade that a lot of people really feel compelled to put on in mystery fiction. Sometimes very necessary, and sometimes it can feel a little bit suffocating to have this mask of hypermasculinity. And I feel like we're supposed to, or at least I always got the impression that while Jeff is a very capable photographer and he enjoys his work, there is a certain element of like the lady doth protest too much when it comes to worthwhile of his attention and worthwhile of his camera being pointed at it. I don't know if you got the same sort of feeling or if
Yeah,
that's just me.
absolutely. And I think that when you bring in the plot point that's really all he can do right now is aim the camera, sometimes with a long lens. The idea that that's what he's reduced to right now. And as the movie opens, he's been in the apartment for 6 weeks. He's a week away from getting a cast off. But the idea that he is nothing but that now and has been for a while. And it's, I guess, kind of good motivation for how damn grumpy he is all the time. But the idea that he's reduced to much less than he would like to be.
Yeah.
Because of his injury.
Yeah.
And of course, we have even more of that at the end. So,
yeah.
God, spoilers for a movie from how many years ago?
Older 70, than my parents.
70 years ago.
Exactly. No, I'm going to circle back to that in a little bit because I think, one of the things that he is so clear about is that he's jealous and angry of the people who he can see who have a more vibrant life than he does. And again, it's 6 weeks. It's not the end of the fucking universe. You know what I mean? Like you got a broken leg, deal with it, No,
that totally makes me think of the age of COVID when people on social media before that were saying, could you stay in one cabin for a month for $1 million? And somebody's, not mine, unfortunately, I wish I had said it. Somebody's sarcastic rejoinder was, you couldn't stay in for 6 weeks to save your grandma, So, and anybody can do 6 weeks or ultimately 7 if he hadn't had another mishap.
Exactly.
But, oh yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely the case.
He's so mad at the composer, the Broadway composer who's having cocktail parties. He hates Miss Torso, like the dancer that lives across the way from him, who he watches do her stretches and her kicks and stuff like that, which must have been so salacious in 1954, like her just dancing around in that little bikini, like God bless. And he hates her. And he kind of really hates the newlyweds too a little bit because like as much as they tickle him, he's like, but I don't have that. And he's just so mad at them. And I think it's a really good juxtaposition for how connected he is with Miss Lonely Hearts, the woman across the way who, can't catch a date to save her life. And he really feels a kinship with this woman, which is weird, again, because he has Grace Kelly in his apartment all the time.
Oh, yeah. The idea of Miss Torso, by the way, I've got to mention one of the things I noticed this time that I really hadn't mentioned all that often before is his friend Doyle, the cop, who was in there a couple of times. At some point, Doyle is, unless I'm mistaken about where he's looking, Doyle is looking out the window and he then becomes the voyeur, the scene, because he's fascinated by Miss Torso. I mean, really, who would not be? But he's riveted to Miss Torso and he kind of pulls himself away when they're continuing a conversation. But then later, Doyle, his gaze kind of sweeps over the nightgown and all that Lisa brought. And he turns and has a smirk or says something sarcastic or something. But Doyle, you're just as big a pervert as any of us. You might as well admit it,
Yeah, I know. I love the way that they treat cops in this, because again, cops are men of action in this, and they're going to go dredge the river. They're going to go chase down a guy. They're going to do something. And it's interesting because Jeff is kind of like proto beatnik, where he's just kind of like, I don't trust authority. I'm living on the edge of the world. The 1950s was the start of that, where he's like, I'm going to live on the edge. I'm going to be counterculture. And you can tell that he wrinkles a little bit at having a friend who's a cop. He's like, I don't like necessarily that I have this relationship with the law, but like a lot of white people were like, but aha, we need to call the police because the police will solve everything. Like it's again, a fairly forward thinking thing that happens in this movie that came out in 1954.
Did you notice, by the way, when he calls Doyle's house and Doyle and the wife are out somewhere and there's a housekeeper who answers the phone, and her voice sounds very much like she is a Black housekeeper. And I'm thinking, okay, is she the only, I mean, you can't even see her. But is she the only person of color? Maybe I'm wrong in the movie.
So.
I don't know if any of the neighbors are, but that also, this is a cop and he can afford a housekeeper who apparently is live-in because I don't know whether they have kids or not, but she's there in the evening or something like that. So, I mean, really, you're talking about poor people or struggling people who are as far as the eye can see from his window. But the idea that the movie in some ways further stratifies the people that it depicts.
Yeah.
In such that even a cop has got a housekeeper.
Yeah.
I literally pictured that lady standing in a foyer answering the phone, when he called. Not to say I was distracted, I wasn't paying attention, but I was like, that's very interesting.
Yeah. That cop has a house. You know what I mean? Like there are different boroughs. That's obviously not in Manhattan are you going to have a house, but like different boroughs, you have standalone homes or at least duplexes and stuff like that. And like that cop definitely has a house. And I'm going through the cast, and I believe that implied Black housekeeper is the only person of color. The composer, the guy who has the big party, is played by an actor named Ross Bagdasarian. So I assume he's probably Armenian.
Is that the
songwriter,
he the creator of Alvin and the Chipmunks?
I think he was.
Yeah,
that's amazing. Yep, he was. Ross Bagdasarian was the creator of the freaking Chipmunks.
I have such a depository of useless information up here.
It's amazing. Oh my God. No, I'm just like, I'm completely overtaken by his IMDb background because Alvin and the Chipmunks is that guy. Oh my God. That's amazing.
Here's where you lay in a little bit of the Alvin and Chipmunks.
If I didn't have to pay for it, I would.
Christmas, whatever it is. And there's not a single person watching this who's going to be happy that you actually did a little bit of that tune, because it's going to be in their brain.
It's going to be in their brains.
They'll go away mad from this whole experience, which is, the way you hope that a podcast about entertainment is going to leave people angry.
Exactly.
Now
you're going to think about
Christmas song stuck in their head.
Exactly. Or like the Alvin and the Chipmunks version of Witch Doctor, which like Sorry.
Oh my God.
Just speed it up.
I'm going to when we get done, I'm going to go turn on MTV Classic and hope that one of the 80s shows is on so that I can kind of come on Aileen or something and get
the brain
Alvin and Chipmunk songs out of my head.
Who would have ever thought that we were talking about one of Hitchcock's most famous and well-regarded movies, and we go down a Alvin and the Chipmunks rabbit hole?
Well, you gotta list that among the things that we cover in this, because we cover it more thoroughly than some of the aspects of the film,
Well, I guess let's go to, so wife disappears, everybody's sweating, everybody's miserable, the songwriter can't write a song. Miss Lonely Hearts is going to take her life because she can't catch a date. Miss Torso looks happy, but we know she's miserable by the end of the movie because her boyfriend was off at war and he's just now coming back. The only people who might even be remotely having a good summer are the newlyweds, and they're off to the left. We don't pay that much attention to them. And then a poor woman's dog dies, and she's just like beyond inconsolable and can't blame her, though I love the little pulley method of putting that dog down in the little basket. It's just so fun.
I never had a dog or a cat who I would trust not to jump off.
Absolutely not.
I know that didn't happen to like the puppy they get later, but yeah, I was, you know me, you know it from talking to him all the time. I worry about cats and dogs and things like that, unreasonably so, maybe unreasonably so. But yeah, I was like, oh God, it would be a whole other. If
my idiots would just jump right out.
Transport a dog to the emergency vet or something like that.
In 1954, I don't think they had emergency vets.
No, probably.
But then we have Grace Kelly being the hero that she freaking is, climbing that fire escape, which is not easy to do. Those things are hostile architecture through and through. And then getting caught and roughed up by the bad guy whose name I can't remember off the top of my head. It's
Lars Thorwald.
See, they play so much with white people. They dabble in the entire palette of whiteness, which I really, really like in this movie. So you have Thelma Ritter, who's like working class Irish. You have pure wasp beauty, you know, Grace Kelly in this. You have implied Italians everywhere. You know, you have the Armenian guy.
That was I had a band name. That was the band name, Implied Italian.
Are they Italian? The bad guy, which normally in movies like this, it's going to be some swarthy man with like dark skin, you know, that's probably shoe polish and you know, like hair that's slick. And it's always Cesar Romero, you know what I mean? From The Thin Man, where he's just like, I am ambiguously ethnic and therefore bad. But they give the character the name, which they didn't have to do, of Lars Thorwald. And you're just like, man, well, I can't tell what you're trying to say here, but I like it. I like it a lot.
And was there a Lars? Was Lars the author of the book, Lars something, not Lars Thorwald, the author of the book Kon-Tiki? Do you know?
I think you're right.
So yes. It was a Lars something. So there are so few Lars. They did a good job with making a name that stuck in my head, because in entertainment wise, the only other Lars that I remember was the never seen husband of the Cloris Leachman character from the Mary Tyler Moore Show. Whereas I told you, it's just like, it's like a vast wasteland of junk up here, but it's useful junk, you know, as I always say, you know, my depth of knowledge is a mile wide and an inch deep. You know, so I remember the various Lars in entertainment for God knows what reason.
The guy who wrote Kon-Tiki was Thor Heyerdahl. So
that's why I was thinking Thor Lars.
Exactly.
What was his name? Lars Thorwald, yes.
Yeah. I feel like it's supposed to be like ambiguously German too, even though it's not. It's very clearly Swedish to anybody who knows now. But I feel like those kind of consonants were supposed to be like, is he, you know, in 1954, where you're just like, I don't know, he might be one of the bad whites, you know, and it was like, ooh, this movie is messing with so much stuff. It makes me so happy.
And I know that Burr was better known later to come, obviously. I don't think Perry Mason had started by that point.
No,
and I'm not sure he even played the character Steve Martin in the Americanized version of Godzilla.
Mm-hmm.
At that point. Maybe he had done neither one of those, but I don't think so. But Burr, who until his later years always had this jet black hair, is so memorable. He's like a character from, you know, you and Libby talked about Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think of people who were just like, that's just too strange, you know, like the judge and who before even in all the reveals and things like that. But Lars Thorwald is so strange and off-putting. I literally would like turn and look at him as he went past, if I passed him on that sidewalk that's out front of the building. And I kind of in my head, and I live in my head, you know, all the time. I always think I wanted to see somebody turn and like look after him when he walks past carrying the heavy suitcase, which then of course came back very light. He's almost like jaunty when he comes back with a suitcase. He's like swinging him and stuff. And he's like this as he's carrying it when it's got his poor dismembered. What was her name? What's like Mrs. Thorwald's name?
Mrs. Thorwald, I think is all she's ever referred to.
It was his wife, Thorwald.
Yes. So Perry Mason, Raymond Burr as Perry Mason started in 1957. And I remember seeing an interview with him where he always kind of played like a bad guy. He always kind of played a heavy. And that word very, astute in that, like, he always played kind of a guy who was going to rough you up. And then for Perry, someone gave him the advice, and this is probably terrible advice now, that like, if you lost a ton of weight, you might play a leading man. And so he did. He lost a ton of weight, and Perry Mason started in 57. This movie was 54. So over the course of, a couple of years, he did lose a substantial amount of weight, and he started playing Perry Mason, which, absolutely defined his career, because Perry Mason fulfills the role of a private investigator / gentleman sleuth. Perry Mason is very wealthy in the books. He is very educated. He knows everything. And he's hired on cases in order to do things. And so it's so interesting to see him fulfill the role of the sort of like almost like Jaws from 007 from James Bond, where he's like this voiceless, menacing, large man. And then to a couple years later, to really get what defines his career, which is actually like dapper, intelligent, almost like Nick Charlesy levels of like ability to sleuth. That's such an interesting like switch flip. And of course, that's on television versus in film, where,
So Emily, I think if I'm interpreting what you're saying right, is your advice to would-be actors is to get as skinny as possible.
No, I would never say that. I would say that in 1957, that was probably good advice, but no, it's just a really interesting way that we think about physicality, especially in movies like this, where, especially again, when playing with class and physicality, because I think this movie does that so well, where, they are not the police, whatever, who owns a home, they are all working class people. And I think one of the, it is moving. It's also a little goofy at the end, but it is moving when, the woman whose dog was killed kind of goes like, what's the matter with all, she says kind of you people, but, she means all of us, where she's like, we're all neighbors. We watch each other. It's mutual voyeurism. We all know each other. This is my dog. You see me take him, let him out every single day, and we don't know each other. Why do we act like strangers? And that's like the overwhelming fear of conservative America when they look at urban neighborhoods, where they're like, oh, everybody's anonymous. You don't know each other. You don't help each other. And I think it's really interesting that this movie is like, just because we don't know each other's names doesn't mean that we don't care. And that's a really beautiful message to come out of a movie in 1954.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And where some of us anyway are backwards now compared to that way of thinking.
Yeah.
That was the closing argument for a movie in 1954 is kind of amazing.
Yeah. Like that I live in the greater Los Angeles area. I've never lived not in a major metro region. So it's like I grew up just outside of New York City, went to school in Boston, and then I've lived in Los Angeles my entire adult life. And I know that you live in a major metropolitan region, people coming in and out. It's big enough.
It is.
If you said it to someone, like if someone in France asked you, where are you from? They'd probably know the city that you named. You know what I mean? Like,
maybe.
Yeah. They'd ask you where Graceland was.
Yeah, well, and I could tell them that it's a long way out west
from the cities you've heard of. It's the third city, but it's still a city. It's still like it's over 100,000 people, isn't it? With the colleges and stuff.
Yeah, it's like 300,000 or something. I was shocked when we moved down here at how much smaller it is than Indianapolis, for example.
Yeah.
But the metro area is like 1 million people. But yeah, and then you get much beyond that, and you're really in
Yeah, the sticks.
Yeah, I won't even get into that. So,
Given the politics of 1954 and given what was happening to New York City, that how pro urban life this movie really seems to be. Even down to the fact that, once Jeff's chucked out a window and like, the bad guy is apprehended, the one bad guy, Miss Lonely Hearts even goes up to the songwriter's apartment and seemingly, hits it off with the songwriter. It's like once it's like, oh, the possibilities of living in an urban environment as opposed to those possibilities probably would not have come around if they were suburban or rural.
yeah, I mean, it's hard to generalize, but definitely that is an opportunity for the scary things like the plot of this movie and the heartwarming things, the opportunities to know people and to get to know people if you don't know them are not something that you can guarantee that you'll find in a suburban setting and certainly not a rural setting. I mean,
Yeah.
this is one of those movies, and this is a well done statement. This is one of those movies where the story would not work if it wasn't in an urban setting like that.
Yeah. No, I actually slightly disagree just because, I think one of the things is one of the wonderful things about New York City especially is that it's a vertical city. And so I think that this plays really well with the set, specifically of saying like community just because it goes up and not out doesn't mean that it's not community. And it reminds me so much of Miss Marple movie or Miss Marple books where, she'll just be sitting in her sitting room with the windows open and someone walks by and she overhears, something that will end up being a clue. Miss Marple and usually has an able-bodied younger person go off and do the dirty work that she can't do. Like in 450 to Paddington, she's got like a housekeeper that she sends off and she's like, you go climb through the basement window and, try to find stuff. And I think it's a really, really good approximation of the rural ideal sort of English countryside,
That's
murder,
true.
but
That's true.
thrown into 6 buildings around a courtyard as opposed to like,
The Village.
a village. Exactly. Exactly. And so I think that's one of the reasons why I do really like it so much. But I want to go back to you bringing up earlier how the tool that Jeff uses to fight off his attacker and how he uses the camera. It's normally something that stands between him and other people in order to keep everything at an arm's length, which I think a lot of reporters and journalists definitely do. Like, you're like, oh, I'm not invested in this emotionally because I have, like my tape recorder or my notebook or my camera. There's something standing in between me and the horrors that I'm witnessing.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely is a, a value to whether you think it's necessarily value to everybody else, but to the reporter, the photographer. And if you haven't seen the movie Civil War, you should. The value of having this tool that lets you capture images, but also filter them.
Mm,
And you can say that a little bit about notebooks also,
yeah.
or digital recorders or something. I mean, a friend of mine used to say that the camera changes a situation just by its presence. And I think that is absolutely the case. But yeah,
Hmm.
the idea that Jeff uses those tools because that's pretty much all other than the plucky visiting nurse
Yeah.
and the the most beautiful woman in the world. Other than those, he has limited resources, and one of them is that camera with the long lens, and of course the flash bulbs.
Yeah. I wonder if anybody underneath the age of 40 would know like about flash bulbs.
Yeah,
Like,
I think that's interesting. Yeah, that's obviously very interesting. But I think that about a lot of things. One of the things I put in one of my books was drawn from the idea that you used to get your news from your friends from that phone that was hanging on the wall in your kitchen or in the hallway outside, and the cord could stretch,
Hmm.
somebody's room, you have a little bit of privacy or something. But yeah, but the idea that we're so connected all the time and always aware. With my Wi-Fi being flaky this week,
Yeah.
I acutely felt it's like, how many years ago I wouldn't be able to do any of these things.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be able to talk like this. And we get so accustomed to it, and kind of like he was accustomed to his life, jet setting around and taking pictures and things like that. But how limited we feel when we don't have those tools
Yeah.
anymore. And in some ways, it's he's still a grumpy ass, but in some ways, I mean, that makes him a little more understandable, because everything that helps him relate to the world, he thinks he doesn't have anymore. And then he
Yeah.
finds a couple of them that he can use, the
Yeah.
long lens and the flash bulbs.
I think one of my favorite things about it is like you can tell that Jeff is the kind of guy who thinks that marriage is the worst thing that could ever happen to a man. And he's almost titillated and thrilled that he has an example to show Lisa that, this is what can happen to you if you get married. Like, your husband can murder you. You would never, don't marry me. You don't know if I'm going to be the guy who can murder you. And then, like, when she gets so into solving the murder and not squeamish at the thought of, like, well, essentially finding this dead woman's head in a duffel bag, she's just almost excited about that as he is. You can tell that he's almost like, shit, I have to find another reason not to propose to the most beautiful woman in the world who secretly loves me.
This is true. This is true. For whatever reason she does. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and you wonder about it, and this is, you can tell that it's a well-written movie because not only are you enthralled in the mystery that's in front of you, and it's not so much of a whodunit as a how catch, which is a really difficult thing that is impossible to do in books because I just don't know how you would do that, like, from a narrative perspective. But, they're so hell-bent on catching Thorson, and he's just kind of like, shit, what do I do with her? And then when he really feels, this is another thing that is, like, I think is secretly feminist about this movie, is that it's not so secret, but like when he truly feels like he has conquered her spirit and she shows up in jeans. And then when she takes out the fashion magazine, it's one of the most humorous things that I think Hitchcock has ever done in a movie, where she's just like, you think you broke me? I'm in this for the long game and I'm gonna break you. And it's just so delicious.
And I don't know whether, not to obsess about Grace Kelly, although plenty of people did, but I don't know that maybe there is a movie where she's in jeans even for a brief scene, like the beginning or like the very end of this movie. And man, I mean, there's like nothing she could wear that she would not look good in.
I know. I know.
You have the kind of meringue dresses and things like that, as opposed to meringue, but the kind of meringue dresses
Yeah.
and the nightgown and everything like that.
Everything's
And then,
chiffon and just like
yeah,
you can see through it and you're just so to be like, oh my God, like she's so beautiful.
but she's like, in a blouse and jeans and probably not really penny loafers, but
Yeah.
that kind of thing at the end. And yes, you're right. It's wonderful when she puts down the book about, international adventure or something like that and picks up the magazine again and is leafing through, enjoying it. To be true to herself.
So she's wearing the pants in that relationship. It's so good. It's so
I'd be
good.
fine with that. I'd be fine with that.
Exactly. Now, you are putting out a book that is set in 1948 later this year. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, I wanted to do something at some point that was kind of about my mom's family. My mom, who's no longer with us, nobody really in that immediate family. I have an aunt who married into those siblings, but my mom had 7 or 8 or 9 in her family. And most of them were women, and they left their little town in Tennessee and went to Muncie, Indiana, which was at the time was an industrial powerhouse I mean, we had 6,000 people working at the Board Water plant. We had 4,000 people working at the Chevrolet plant. We had 3,000 working at the Delco battery plant. There was Guide Lamp not too far from there, and all the machine shops that supplied all those huge factories. So the premise of the book is exactly what the premise was for my mom's family. Her dad and the 4 oldest girls moved from Tennessee to Indiana and basically tried to make a living before the mom and the youngest kids, the little kids, left Tennessee and came up to Indiana. The funniest part about that is that it's hard to imagine for anybody who knows me. My family has like a streak of ill temper at times. And so my grandfather, my mom's dad, he and the 4 older girls would get jobs at some factory, and he would get irritated at something and he would quit the job. Mm-hmm. But he would make all his daughters quit too.
My God.
So they all stormed out. And because Muncie was Muncie, I mean, American lawnmower, the real lawnmower, the one you push mow.
Yeah.
And everything. They had a factory in Muncie. And
I didn't know any of this.
So they could just migrate from
walk down the street,
just walk to the next factory, and all 5 of them get jobs. But I was fascinated by that family dynamic, with a part of the family coming to Indiana and part of the family staying there until the Indiana family was established. And then at some point, I was looking at a blog by my friend John Disher. And John had gone through the Rivoli Theater in Muncie before it was torn down in the late 1980s. And I was writing about that demolition, right, for the newspaper. And John posted many, many photos that he took of things that he found during the demolition. And one of them was a ticket to a spook show. It was just something that was found there from June 11th, 1948. And he found it 40 years later and posted a picture on his blog. And it was a spook shows. And the title of mine is Ghost Show, which they're all also known by that, were these traveling magic / horror / comedy troupes. And there's an entire book called Ghost Masters, which documents the history of these, which started in France and also in the United States in the 1800s. And they ran pretty much in the United States up until like the 1970s.
Wow.
And I think it rapidly got to the point where somebody decided it's not probably the best idea to like turn all the lights off in a theater and start doing things to terrify the people.
Make people panic.
Make people panic. So the idea of writing about my family and melding it with this story is what led me to write Ghost Show. And I threw everything into it. I describe it as, and this dates me, as Rich Man, Poor Man, the novel Rich Man, Poor Man. It's like Rich Man, Poor Man, but there are no rich men.
Yeah.
It's basically these flat broke family who comes from Tennessee to Indiana. And I mix in all these things like, the youngest girl having consciousness raised because she goes to type papers for a lesbian college professor, and she falls in love with a Romani boy whose family is traveling and is there, and of course is roughed up by everybody because of the gypsies connotation. And we have the one girl who goes to work for a lawyer and does not have the greatest experience in her life. So all these things that I threw in there, including an actual real ghost, and because there was supposedly a ghost in this theater that I'm writing about.
I love it.
And also Harry Truman shows up.
Why not?
Harry Truman. Why not? Harry Truman had come to Muncie twice in that year on the campaign trail.
Yeah,
literally on the back of a train making speeches.
That's awesome.
So I made the parents in the book avid Truman Knights, and they love Truman. And
hat salesman Harry Truman.
Yeah. And Harry shows up right at the worst, most tragic point for the family. And Harry's mother had died. His beloved mother had died a few months before. And that wisdom he's able to impart to these people who were just like wrecked by a tragedy. All of this stuff was just just impossible for me to not want to put into a book, which is why it is so freaking long. I mean, it's literally like, I'm rereading it right now and I'm at page 200 and something. And it's like, oh, only another 300 or 400 to go, So
You're really terse like I am. Like, we keep our word counts down. I need to know what the word count is on this sucker.
yeah, our friend Libby Cudmore, she's editing a story for me. And she was like all but cursing me. Put some freaking emotion into these characters,
She's got a newspaper background too, so she knows, but
I'm just too close.
She's awesome. I cannot thank you. So do you know when pre-order links for Ghost Show is going to be up?
I don't. Jill and I are talking about doing it before the Christmas season so that if people need something to make their Christmas tree taller, it'll be like this thing like this,
It'll be a nice little doorstop.
So I'm not sure. Basically, present company included, a couple of people still have to read this damn thing. And that I posted a picture on the blog of my friend John Disher's picture of the Rivoli Theater because the climax of the story takes place in the theater during a ghost show run by a Bela Lugosi type washed up actor. Oh my God.
We need to bring back traveling vaudeville.
Oh,
I had a great uncle who was a vaudevillian comedian.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. I don't know a whole lot about him, but man, we need to bring that back.
So anyway, it's my typical thing of too many characters, too many plots, and this one, too many pages.
You're really giving it the hard sell here, Keith.
Oh my God. Well, I'll put a more optimistic spin on it before we actually put the thing out. I'll try to think of something, it's just guaranteed if you see a bug crawling across your living room, you want to throw it at it, it will almost certainly kill it.
Press your tofu with Keith Roysdon's Ghost Show. I keep in touch with you on social media.
Well, first I would ask them, why do you want to be on social media?
Because you're delightful, and I've given you the nod.
I ask myself
like
that every day too. So, thank you. Yeah, my name, which is just impossible to spell, and people have trouble saying it. But if you do a cursory search for me, you'll find way too many places where I'm haunting the corners of the internet.
And I will also politely have links in the show notes for everybody who wants to stalk you as much as I do. Thank you so much for chatting with me. It's always delightful.
It's so much fun. I'm here every other week. If you think maybe every third week would be better, I'm down with that.